Imperial Library of Constantinople was believed to be the greatest in the world outside the Vatican. The library, which at one stage consisted of over 100,000 manuscripts, survived for almost 1,000 years before it was supposedly destroyed in the Fourth Crusade of 1204 when Norman Crusaders devastated the city. However, there are rumors that the library survived largely intact and was somehow spirited out of the city to its eventual destination in modern Moscow. It became known as the Library of Ivan III, and some researchers believe it lies there still, in vaults beneath the Kremlin building, waiting to be discovered. Standing on a triangular peninsula between Europe and Asia, modern Istanbul, formerly Constantinople, ancient Byzantium, is the largest city and principal seaport in Turkey. The city's original name, Byzantium, possibly derives from that of Byzas, as leader of the Greeks from the city of Megara, west of Athens, who, according to legend, captured the peninsula from pastoral Thracian tribes and constructed the town around 657 BC. In 196 AD, the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus burned the town for opposing him in a civil war, afterwards rebuilding it and naming it Augusta Antonina in honor of his son. Later, Emperor Constantine wanted to build a new capital of the Roman Empire on the site of ancient Troy, but changed his mind and located his new city at the site of Old Byzantium, claiming in 330 AD that it was a new Rome, Nova Roma. Soon afterwards, however, it was renamed Constantinople after the emperor. The great city would be Christian but governed by Roman law and adopt Greek as its primary language. Due to its unique geographic location spanning Europe and Asia, it would soon become a melting pot of peoples and cultures. In 337 AD, Constantine died, leaving the empire in confusion and the question of his successor up in the air. Finally, his son Constantius II defeated his brothers and all other challengers to become the Roman Empire's sole emperor. Constantius II expanded the governmental bureaucracy, adding quaestors, praetors, and even tribunes. According to most historians, he is credited with building the first of three Hagia Sophias, the Church of Holy Wisdom, in 360 AD. The great church was later destroyed by fire in 404 AD, after which it was rebuilt by Theodosius II. It was destroyed and rebuilt again under Justinian in 532 AD. Constantinople was the heart and capital of what became known as the Byzantine Empire, the eastern half of the Roman Empire. The empire survived for 1,000 years after the western half, centered in Rome, had crumbled into various feudal kingdoms, only to fall to Ottoman Turkish attacks in 1453. About 357 AD, Constantius II, concerned about the deterioration of a large collection of early texts written on papyrus rolls, began the formation of what was to become the Imperial Library of Constantinople. He ordered manuscripts, including the Judeo-Christian scriptures copied from papyrus, onto the more permanent medium of parchment or vellum. The person in charge of the library under Constantius II is believed to have been a man named Themestius, who supervised a team of scribes and librarians who copied the texts on papyrus rolls onto parchment or papyrus codices. It is believed by some researchers that this library preserves some of the texts that survived the burning of the Library of Alexandria, though the historical accounts of the various periods of destruction at Alexandrian are not clear on this. The 12th century epitomist Johann Zonarus Relays was quoted as stating that in 475, when the Imperial Library of Constantinople was damaged by fire, contained 120,000 volumes, which suggests that the library grew steadily during the first century after its founding. In fact, the majority of Greek classics which exist today are known through Byzantine copies originating from the Imperial Library of Constantinople. The Theodosian Code informs us that in 372, the Emperor Valens ordered the employment of 7 copyists, 4 for Greek and 3 for Latin texts, and some assistants to maintain and repair the books at the Imperial Library. Thus we know that the library housed both Greek and Latin texts, but not necessarily in separate libraries, as was the practice in Rome. It is known that the library was burnt in the year 473, though ancient sources reported that Constantius II, Themestius, and the scribes working at the library managed to save and recopy many works before they were completely lost to the fire. Some historians believe that part of the collection housed in the library was later obtained by Emperor Charlemagne in the 8th century, though there is no solid evidence to support this. What is beyond doubt is that the Imperial Library is known to have been at least partially destroyed in the Fourth Crusade in 1204, when Norman Crusaders sacked Constantinople, almost completely destroying the city. The Imperial Library was set on fire, probably destroying much of its collections. It is believed that Crusaders may have sold some rare Byzantine manuscripts to Italian buyers. At Constantinople, shortly before the city fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, we get a glimpse of what may have been the last remaining part of a great library there from a Spanish visitor to the city who sought a reading room in the Imperial Palace. At the entrance to the palace, beneath certain chambers, is an open loggia of marble with stone benches around it and stones like tables raised on low pillars in front of them, placed end to end. Here are many books and ancient writings and histories, and on one side are gaming boards. The palace that this visitor saw has disappeared, and we don't know if it was part of the Great Library at Constantinople or in a private collection. Zoe Paleologina, who later changed her name to Sophia around 1449, the 7th of April 1503, was a Byzantine princess who became Grand Princess of Moscow as the second wife of Grand Prince Ivan III. Known as Sophia of Byzantium, she was the niece of the last two Byzantine emperors, and her marriage was proposed by Pope Paul II in 1469, either in the hope of strengthening the influence of the Catholic Church in Russia or of unifying the Orthodox and Catholic Church. Some researchers believe that when Sophia and her entourage left Constantinople and travelled to Moscow, she carried with her as her dowry some of the treasures of Byzantine, among which were the remains of the Imperial Library. The Vatican and many other wealthy inhabitants of Rome apparently offered to purchase the whole collection, but Ivan III, realizing its value, kept it. But worried about the power of Rome, Ivan had the manuscripts hidden away in a secret location. This location became known as the Vaults of Liberia. Liberia comes from the Latin word liber, meaning book. It is believed to have been located underneath Moscow, possibly in a large tunnel network beneath the Kremlin. The collection was subsequently expanded by Ivan IV the Terrible, who sent his men all over Europe to collect rare folios and manuscripts. After his death in 1584, the library seems to have disappeared without a trace. The earliest reference to the lost library comes from 1518, when scholar and translator Mikhail Tripolis, known as Maximus the Greek, was in Russia and came into contact with Moscow Grand Prince Vasily III, the son of Ivan III. In a meeting between Mikhail and Vasily, it is said that countless multitudes of Greek books were shown to Mikhail by Vasily III. The rest of history, apart from a few lines in European chronicles from the 16th to the 18th centuries, is mostly silent on the subject. However, in the 19th century, an Estonian historian named Christopher von Dabilov claimed to have seen a list of folios from the missing collection, though he never provided proof of this. But the majority of scholars believe that the library of Ivan IV is nothing more than a legend. Even if the library of Ivan the Terrible had existed, it would probably have been destroyed by now, perhaps in one of 3 fires which ravaged Moscow during the 16th and 17th centuries. There are, of course, some researchers who believe that the Kremlin is hiding the existence of the library. Indeed, every few years, believers, apparently acting on leaked secret information, undertake clandestine excavations in the Russian capital in the hope of chancing upon the long-lost library of Ivan IV. The ruins of a 2,500-year-old lost ancient civilization were recently found in a lake in Kyrgyzstan. Some researchers believe that these ancient remains may include an ancient Armenian monastery where, according to legend, the body of St. Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples, and his many relics were buried. A number of Orthodox Christians have long believed that Matthew was finally laid to rest here long after his death. Since the 19th century, Russian scientists, archaeologists and researchers from the Kyrgyz Academy of Sciences have studied ancient relics around Issyk-Kul hot lake, one of the world's highest and deepest lakes, located in a valley in the high Central Asian mountains in the Republic of Kyrgyzstan. Issyk-Kul Lake is 113 miles long, up to 37 miles wide, and has an area of 2,408 square miles. It reaches 2,192 feet in depth. The lake was first mentioned by Chinese and Islamic mapmakers at the beginning of the 8th century. Archaeological finds from the site have included petroglyphs and 3,000-year-old nomadic burial mounds known as kurgans, early Christian monasteries and medieval cities. The lake has long held a fascination for researchers, as divers have been exploring its depths since as long ago as the 1860s. There was a significant rise in the water level of the lake at the end of the 14th century and the beginning of the 15th. As a result of this, the remains of various ancient cultures were submerged, including Bronze Age settlements, Saki-Usuni burial mounds of the 1st century BC, medieval towns and settlements, and Turkic monuments. Since 1985, Professor Vladimir Flosky, Vice President of the Kyrgyz Academy of Sciences, has been directing underwater surveys and excavations at Issyk-Kul, and in 2010 he joined forces with National Geographic to explore the extraordinary history of the lake. In September 2013, scientists and archaeologists from National Geographic began investigations at the lake. The team chose this site due to its position at an important location along the legendary Silk Road, with routes running along its shores. In the past, innumerable traders, caravans and nomadic tribes and armies traveled along the 113-mile-long lake, leaving an extraordinary archaeological legacy behind. The Silk Road was an ancient trade route linking China with the West, along which goods and ideas were carried between the two great civilizations of Rome and China, and later between medieval European kingdoms and China. In the Middle Ages, the area surrounding the lake was fought over by two opposing lines of descendants from Genghis Khan, the Eastern Mongols and the city-dwelling Islamic Western Mongols. The legendary Western Mongol leader, Tamerlane, was said to have fought a battle over the lake region in the early 1400s, and there are medieval records of a palace built by the conqueror on the lake shore, Issyk-Kul. Some researchers believe it's the same structure as the 15th century palace near the town of Cholpon Ata, described by the medieval Arab historian Ibn Arab Sheikh. In December 2007, it was announced that Russian researchers had discovered important ancient remains of previously unknown culture beneath the lake. According to reports, Russian archaeologists discovered traces of a large city with an area of several square kilometers. In other words, it was a metropolis in its time. We also found Scythian burial mounds, eroded by waves over the centuries, and numerous well-preserved artifacts. Bronze battle axes, arrowheads, self-sharpening daggers, objects discarded by smiths, casting molds, and a faceted gold bar, which was a monetary unit of the time. In August of 2014, Russian news outlets published a story that divers from Tomsk State University had located another previously unknown ancient settlement beneath the lake, along with 200 artifacts. Perhaps the most fascinating find was a piece of large ceramic pot which had a stamp on it written in Armenian and Syrian scripts. This find may have been supporting evidence for the story that an Armenian monastery existed on this site in medieval times. According to Dmitry Gorn, who led the diving team, the inscribed pot fragment was truly unique. He added, "Experts are now working on the identification of the writings of the stamps, but it's supposed to be Armenian Syrian script. If this proves to be correct, it will be further evidence that there was an Armenian monastery on Issyk-Kul in the 14th century, where, according to the legends, relics of Matthew were stored." There is indeed a tradition that a monastery on this remote lake was the last resting place of evangelist St. Matthew, one of the 12 apostles of Jesus. Intriguingly, when the Russian traveler P.P. Semenov was in Venice in the 1850s, he came upon a copy of the Catalan Atlas from 1375. In this work, he found a drawing of a lakeside monastery with the caption, "The spot is named Issyk-Kul. Here is a monastery of Armenian brethren which is rumored to possess the relics of St. Matthew the Apostle and Evangelist." The extraordinary Catalan atlas is a perpetual calendar and thematic representation of the known world produced by the Mallorcan Cartographic School. The creation of the atlas has been attributed to Abraham Kresk, a Jewish cartographer from Palma, Mallorca. Semenov believed that the monks probably chose a site on the Kermenti Bay, as the site was protected from rough water and rich with fish. After visiting Issyk-Kul in 1856–57, Semenov wrote, "Kermenti Bay meets these conditions, but I unfortunately did not find on the shore, nor in the drifts of the neighboring shore, any objects supporting my supposition." 50 years later, a Russian Orthodox monastery was built in the area. However, many Christians believe that Matthew the Apostle's remains were discovered in Salerno, Italy in 1080 and are now in Salerno Cathedral, which is dedicated to the saint. Apparently, St. Matthew's relics had been brought to the town in 954 AD. St. Matthew, also called St. Matthew the Evangelist and St. Matthew the Apostle, was one of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ and the traditional author of the first synoptic gospel, the Gospel according to Matthew. According to the calling of Matthew in the biblical book of Matthew, he had been a tax collector before being called to follow Jesus. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." According to tradition, Matthew's missions later brought him to the east, perhaps Ethiopia and Persia. Stories differ as to whether he died a natural death or that of a martyr. According to another tradition, he died as a martyr in Syria, and his relics were kept there for 150 years. Apparently, his followers later fled from persecution to the depths of Asia, bringing the relics of the apostle with them. Yet another tradition holds that St. Matthew died while traveling to India and established several Christian communities on his way, one of which was Issyk-Kul. It's known that a thriving Christian Armenian community existed in Kyrgyzstan since the 1st century AD. Many artifacts were found in Chu Valley, a large valley located in North Tian Shan, including an engraved stone with a cross carrying an Armenian inscription, "Jesus our Lord." A Syrian inscription under the cross stated, "This is the grave of Johann, the Armenian bishop," and a date 772 in Armenian chronology corresponding to 1323 AD. In medieval times, 2 Armenian monasteries stood near one of the villages on the shore of the lake, Svetli Mis, Bright Cape. More evidence that the remains of St. Matthew may have ended up in an Armenian monastery on the lake comes from the late 19th century, when Baron Kolbaz, Russian general and explorer of Central Asia, traveled to the site. He wrote, "It is worth noting that not far from the Trinity Monastery, at the confluence of rivers Tayup and Koisu, ruins of an ancient town are found underwater. The town hosted the Armenian monastery guarding the relics of St. Matthew." Archaeological investigation of the Kermenti settlements began in 2005, when an exploratory team visited the site of the monastery and settlement. Finds from the area include bronze crosses, a signet ring with ornamentation, colored beads, and more than 24 crucifix necklaces. Only ongoing continuous archaeological expeditions and detailed historical research can solve the mysteries of Issyk-Kul. Nevertheless, some people are convinced that this site is indeed the location of the lost Armenian monastery, and possibly the remains of St. Matthew.
The Maltese archipelago consists of 5 islands in the central Mediterranean Sea, positioned 60 miles to the south of Sicily. Only 3 of these islands are inhabited. Malta Island, which is the largest, along with Gozo and Camino. Malta has a long history going back at least 7,000 years, with a wide range of archaeological remains, from the megalithic temples and underground chambers of prehistory to the Baroque architecture of the medieval period. The most spectacular and enigmatic of the ancient remains on Malta are the Neolithic temples and tombs, built 1,000 years before the pyramids. And Malta has the oldest freestanding stone buildings in the world. One of the most fascinating and mysterious of these megalithic structures is known as the Hal-Soflieni Hypogeum. A hypogeum is a subterranean rock-cut chamber of an ancient building, and there are a number of these type of monuments spread across the Mediterranean, in southern France, Sicily, Sardinia, and Crete. The Hal-Soflieni Hypogeum is an underground tomb and temple complex, extending for around 5,380 square feet, and is located in the town of Paola, which is in the south of Malta Island. The site was discovered by accident in 1902 when workers digging cisterns for new houses above broke through the roof of one of the chambers. The first excavations at the site were performed by Father Emmanuel Magri of the Society of Jesus, and later continued by Dr. Temiz Zamit, the first curator of Malta's museums department. Between 1905 and 1911, Zamit excavated a fascinating collection of archaeological material from the complex, including human remains, pottery, beads, amulets, and figurines, and he wrote a series of reports of his work at the site that was published from 1910 onward. The Hypogeum was first opened to the public in 1908, while excavations were still taking place. The Hal-Soflieni Hypogeum consists of a series of oval chambers, halls, and niches, set on 3 levels, one underneath the other. Incredibly, the underground structures were all carved out of solid rock in semi-darkness, allegedly using stone mallets and antler picks, and later smoothed over using flint implements. The upper level of the complex consists of a hollow with a central passageway, with burial chambers cut into the natural caves on each side. This is the oldest level of the Hypogeum, in use from 3600 BC to 3300 BC, and is similar in plan to earlier rock-cut tombs found elsewhere on the islands, such as the Shemshia tombs, which date to around 4000 BC. The middle level, 3300 to 3000 BC, was cut into the subsurface rock as an extension of the upper level of the structure. This level exhibits exquisite stoneworking skill in the elaborately carved trilithons, which are a construction with 2 upright posts, with a horizontal one set on top. The trilithons are set in imitation of the built masonry of the above-ground megalithic structures found elsewhere on Malta. This level also contains some of the most important features of the Hypogeum monument, such as the main chamber, the oracle room, and the Holy of the Holies. Most of the wall surfaces in the main chamber originally had a wash of red ochre, tracing out spiral and honeycomb designs, some of which are still visible today. The famous Sleeping Lady, a 12-centimeter-long reclining terracotta figure with traces of red ochre, was recovered either from here or a nearby room which is known as the Snake Pit. Believed to date from around 3000 BC, this corpulent ceramic figure is naked to the waist and wears a fringed skirt. She appears to be in a deep, tranquil sleep on a bed with a rush mattress, along with other similar figurines from the Neolithic sites on Malta and elsewhere in the Mediterranean. The Sleeping Lady has been used as evidence for the theory of universal peace-loving Mother Goddess or Great Goddess worship in prehistory, proposed by a number of researchers. One interesting theory regarding the Sleeping Lady, whether goddess or not, is that either in a trance or asleep, she may represent a place in the Hypogeum where dreams or trance visions were interpreted by priests or priestesses. Such a dark subterranean context would have been ideal for the stimulation of such states as it would induce dreams and visions. Alternatively, because the area was used for burials, the statue may be a representation of eternal sleep. The enigmatic Sleeping Lady figurine is now on display at the National Museum of Archaeology in Valletta, the capital city of Malta. Also on the middle level, the roughly rectangular oracle room has an elaborately decorated ceiling of ochre-painted spirals and a fascinating side chamber, which has the property to amplify and echo a deep human voice. This is referred to as a resonance chamber. Whether this intriguing effect was intentional or not is difficult to say, though the possibility that these strange acoustics were utilized in some religious ceremonies performed in the chambers is an intriguing one. The chamber resonates at an intriguing 111 Hz, which is known to be a healing frequency. Immersing yourself in this frequency can help increase the healing process of internal and external wounds. The Holy of the Holies is perhaps the most elaborately decorated room in the whole complex, with its trilithon door frame and pierced stone or porthole entrance, reflecting the architecture of Maltese freestanding Neolithic monuments. The third and lowest level at the Hypogeum is 35 feet below street level and has been dated to 3150 to 2500 BC. It consists of a maze of chambers, which were filled with water when discovered in the early 1900s. As there have been no finds of either bones or artifacts from this level, it has been suggested that these chambers here may have been designed as storage for water or grain. Water storage has also been put forward as the possible function of the Hypogeum at Knossos on Crete, dated between 2150 and 2000 BC. The primary function of the Hypogeum site was certainly as a cemetery, as around 7,000 skeletons have been found in the chambers, ranging in date from 3600 to 2500 BC. In other words, spanning the life of the site itself. This amount of human remains is significantly higher than the tombs could have housed at any one period, indicating, along with the dates of the skeletons, that the complex was used for burials over several centuries. The fact that no human remains were discovered in some rooms, such as the Holy of Holies, would suggest other functions for these parts of the site. Perhaps they were used for funerary rituals involving priests contacting the ancestors. An interesting clue to one of the original functions of the Hypogeum is the resemblance of the site to natural caves. The near darkness of the original subterranean chambers and passageways is a little difficult to imagine nowadays with the brightness of the artificial lighting at the site. But originally, whoever was allowed to venture down into the depths of the Hypogeum would only have had the dim light of animal fat lamps to help them through the maze of rooms, passageways, and niches. Perhaps what took place inside the Hypogeum involved some kind of procession or ritual initiation through the disorienting labyrinth structure, which included passing through porthole entrances into particularly restricted shrines. Such a mysterious subterranean structure as the Hypogeum is bound to generate its own legends and folklore. Indeed, there are a host of legendary tales associated with the Hypogeum, from disappearing parties of school children to subterranean monsters and underground alien bases. The majority of these stories can be traced back to an article by Richard Walter in the August 1940 edition of the National Geographic magazine entitled Wanderers Awheel in Malta. This wartime piece discusses the various underground passageways on Malta being used as part of the fortifications and defense system of the island. It also states that at one time it was possible to traverse the island using these tunnels, but the government closed the entrances to these tunnels after school children and their teachers became lost in the labyrinth while on a study tour and never returned. Apparently, the parents of the children claim they could hear cries of the children for weeks afterwards, coming from under the ground in several parts of the island, as if some strange phenomena was beckoning others to their doom. In this single article from the National Geographic lies the origin of a host of contemporary folklore about disappearances and secret tunnels underneath the Hypogeum, which has been mostly built up on the internet. The problem is that the original National Geographic article cites no sources for the tale, and no contemporary accounts of the tragedy have ever been discovered. The Hypogeum is not mentioned by name in the article, so we are not even sure if the alleged incident even occurred there. The story has the ring of local folklore, perhaps a tale concocted to keep children away from the dangerous tunnels. It also brings to mind the mysterious disappearance of the Australian schoolgirls in Joan Lindsay's novel, Picnic at Hanging Rock, 1967, for many years believed to be a true incident, despite the protestations of the author of the novel. Thanks to a number of stories published first in the 1960s and copied on the internet over the past decade or so, the folklore of the alleged Hypogeum disappearance has taken on a life of its own. According to these stories, which conveniently don't cite any sources, 30 children vanished with their teachers while on a study tour of the Hypogeum. New elements, with no foundation in fact whatsoever, were added to the archaeology of the Hypogeum site itself to make the supposed disappearance more lurid. So we have 30,000 bodies discovered by archaeologists in the chambers, not 7,000. And the remains were all human sacrifices to some underworld god. In the best traditions of the modern folklore of underground archaeological sites, the tunnels underneath the Hypogeum are said to stretch for hundreds of miles, all the way to the catacombs underneath Rome. Improving on the original National Geographic article, we are told that a British embassy worker, or in some accounts, an American tourist, called Miss Lois Jessup, discovered a series of tunnels underneath the lower level of the Hypogeum, and in an unexplored cavern, she encountered several large hairy creatures with strange powers. Apparently, she later learned that this was the same cavern where the children and their teachers had disappeared sometime in the 1940s, after which the entrance of the Hypogeum was sealed off and nobody was allowed to investigate the site. From working at the British Embassy, Miss Lois Jessup went on to become secretary of the New York Flying Saucer Information Bureau. The sources for these bizarre stories include a 1960s printed lecture by one-time director of Borderland Sciences Research Foundation, Riley Crabb, called The Reality of the Cavern World, and a chapter, Malta, Entrance to the Cavern World, in a 1966 book entitled Enigma Fantastique, by W. Gordon Allen, essentially a reprint of the Crabb article. There is one element of these bizarre legends about the Hypogeum that has some truth to it, however. The site was indeed closed for a number of years between 1992 and 1996, though not because of any mysterious disappearance in its tunnels. The reason was that major conservation work was being carried out due to the damage being done to the limestone walls by years of visitors exhaling carbon dioxide in the enclosed space. To protect against this damage, numbers are now restricted to 80 pre-booked visitors per day, and a microclimate has been installed above the underground chambers to regulate air temperature and humidity. In 1980, the fascinating Hall Sophlieni Hypogeum was added to UNESCO's World Heritage List. Strangely enough, when now visiting the Hypogeum, visitors are not permitted to photograph, film, or even take audible recordings, while security guards watch over a controlled small group of 20 visitors. Many researchers ponder, why is that, and is there something that is being kept away from the public?
A 2nd century map of Germania by the ancient Egyptian Greek scholar Ptolemy has always baffled scholars, who have been for centuries unable to relate many of the places depicted to known settlements. But recently, a team of researchers based in Berlin has managed to crack the code, revealing that half of Germany's cities are at least 1,000 years older than previously believed. Ptolemy was an Egyptian scholar of Greek descent who flourished in the city of Alexandria during the 2nd century AD. He was an astronomer, mathematician and geographer, and a large part of medieval astronomy and geography were built on his ideas. His astonishing world map, published as part of his treatise Geography in the 2nd century, was the first to use longitudinal and latitudinal lines. Ptolemy based his maps mainly on the maps and writings of Marinus of Tyre, about 100 AD, of whom, however, he was highly critical. Ptolemy did use other sources which have not been traced, and also added more current information available to him at the time, mainly concerning the Asian and African coasts of the Indian Ocean. He would also have made use of astronomical and geographical specialist literature available in the Great Library of Alexandria. Ptolemy is also well known today for his geocentric or Earth-centered model of the universe, now known as the Ptolemaic system. In Ptolemy's great 13-volume work, the Syntaxis, also known as the Almagest, Ptolemy made some startling observations. When compared with modern astronomical tables, some of them are so accurate that Isaac Newton claimed he couldn't have made them with the instruments he said he used. Frustratingly, some of Ptolemy's other observations are full of errors. Ptolemy also wrote a treatise on astrology called Astrological Influences, in which he stated his belief that astrology was a legitimate science which describes the physical effects of the heavens on life on Earth. Ptolemy's geography was written around AD 150 in 8 volumes and contained 26 maps in coloured ink on dried animal skin. It was essentially what today would be called an atlas, though unfortunately his maps have subsequently disappeared and nothing remains of the work but his index. His work was painstakingly copied by hand at the time and redistributed, but many of his maps were not redrawn when copies were made. The majority of copies known to exist today do not include Ptolemy's original drawings. Instead, the books include maps made hundreds of years later based on his descriptions. However, over the years, various scholars have been able to redraw Ptolemy's maps accurately from the longitudes and latitudes in degrees for roughly 8,000 locations on his world map. So in essence, what we have in Ptolemy's map is a clear and thorough picture of the world as it was known by an inhabitant of the Roman Empire at its height. This vast world extended from the Shetland Islands north of Scotland to the sources of the Nile in Uganda in the south, from the Canary Islands in the west to China and Southeast Asia in the east. Ptolemy believed the world as it was known then covered about a quarter of the Earth's surface, and in this he was fairly accurate. Like numerous ancient books and scholarly works, especially those housed at the now disappeared library at Alexandria, Ptolemy's geography was lost for over a millennium to Western scholarship. But towards the end of the 1400s, during the Renaissance period, his work was rediscovered and translated into Latin, the language of Western scholars at the time. The work became popular once again and over 40 editions were printed. In fact, it wouldn't be going too far to say that the new edition caused a sensation, challenging the very foundation of medieval map-making, which had been that map-makers up until then had based the sizes of countries and cities on their importance rather than on mathematical calculations. Therefore, the more important a country was perceived as being, the larger it would appear on the map. Ptolemy's geography is an astonishing achievement when one considers that for over 15 centuries it was the most detailed topography of Europe and Asia available and the best reference on how to collect data and draw maps. The most authentic copy of Ptolemy's map still in existence is an edition produced around the year 1300 and kept by the Vatican. Ptolemy's incredible atlas was in the news again recently when a new study of it was made by a team of classical philologists, mathematical historians, and surveying experts at Berlin Technical University's Department for Geodesy and Geoinformation. The early histories of the majority of German towns east of the Rhine, an area that the Romans were never able to occupy permanently, are largely unknown, and the places themselves are not stated in documents until the Middle Ages. Logically, this should mean that the cities date back no more than 500 years or so. However, the researchers from Berlin Technical University Science have been able to challenge this assumption by producing an incredible map of Central Europe as it was 2,000 years ago, based on Ptolemy's geography. One of Ptolemy's maps was Germania Magna, a territory that must have been completely unknown to someone living in the distant Egyptian city of Alexandria on an estuary of the Nile. According to Ptolemy, this area is bordered by the Rhine in the west, the North Sea and the Baltic Sea in the north, the Danube in the south, and the Vistula and the Western Carpathian Mountains in the east. Curiously, Ptolemy lists 94 settlements in Germania, while the far more accessible 3 provinces of Gallia had only 114 settlements in total. Ptolemy also doesn't attribute any of these Germanic settlements to a tribal group, though he notes their latitude and longitude accurately to within a few minutes. If this was unknown non-Roman territory, where was Ptolemy getting his information? There's also the major problem that if the Ptolemaic coordinates of a place are compared to its coordinates in the modern geographic reference system, they're usually completely different. There are a number of reasons for this, but among them is the different zero meridians of the Ptolemaic and modern reference systems. There are also various errors in the Ptolemaic coordinates. Furthermore, the majority of the place names in Germania Magna occur nowhere else, and are only handed down by Ptolemy, not by any other ancient writer. So although Ptolemy's map provides us with the most comprehensive topographical description of ancient Germania, because of these aforementioned problems it hasn't been possible up to now to reliably locate even a few of the places he mentions. It's known that Ptolemy never took his own measurements in northern and western Europe, and certainly not in the Germanic lands. Researchers believe he may well have drawn on long-lost Roman traders' travel itineraries and sailors' notes, or even consulted maps used by Roman legions operating in northern Europe in the form of war reports and maps. But the answer to the puzzle of Germania's ancient settlements has never been found. Until now, that is. For the first time, a team of experts combining skills in the field of surveying and mapping came together to try and solve one of Ptolemy's map's many mysteries. The Berlin-based team examined the data on Ptolemy's map of Germania Magna for 6 long years, developing a so-called geodetic deformation analysis that would hopefully correct the map's mistakes. One of the results of their work is the pinpointing of the hometowns of the legendary Germanic figures Siegfried and Arminius to within 6 to 12 miles. The team even produced a book, Germania and the Island of Thule, about their fascinating project. Although the copy of Ptolemy's geography held by the Vatican is thought to be the oldest, the Berlin team was somehow able to get hold of copies of a parchment which had been tracked down to Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, Turkey, once the residence of the Ottoman sultans. The priceless document consisted of unbound sheepskin pages with writing in Roman capital letters. This is now believed to be the oldest edition of Ptolemy's work ever discovered. Using the newly discovered map, the team discovered that even minor German towns such as Salzkotten or Lallendorf had existed for at least 2,000 years. They found that Trever, located at the confluence of the Elbe and Alster rivers, was the precursor to Hamburg, and that Leipzig was known as Arigelia. In essence, these discoveries show that half the cities in Germany are now 1,000 years older than previously believed. Another fascinating aspect of the research has been the fact that a large amount of Ptolemy's coordinates for ancient German settlements often turn out to coincide with sites where archaeologists had previously found Gothic or Teutonic houses and large elaborate tombs erected for tribal princes. What more secrets awaiting discovery lie in the coordinates of Ptolemy's maps?
Nan Madol is located near the southern side of the Federated States of Micronesia and is the only ancient city ever built on top of a coral reef. The ruined city is one of today's great archaeological mysteries and is sometimes interpreted as the remains of one of the lost continents of Atlantis, Lemuria, or Mu. In fact, Nan Madol was one of the sites James Churchward identified as being part of the lost continent of Mu in his book, The Lost Continent of Mu, Motherland of Man. The ruins of the ancient city complex of Nan Madol are located on a coral reef in a lagoon on the minuscule town of Temwen, close to the eastern shore of the island of Pompne in the federal states of Micronesia. Nan Madol is composed of 92 artificial islands spread over 200 acres. Surrounded by water on 3 sides with a stone wall enclosing the complex, the city complex is sometimes referred to as the Venice of the Pacific. Although there is evidence of human activity at the site dating back to the 1st or 2nd century BC, the construction of artificial islets did not begin until around the 8th and 9th century AD. The majority of the megalithic structures were built from the 13th to the 17th centuries by the Sordeleurs, descendants of 2 brothers, possessed of magic powers who founded a religious community in the 6th century AD based on the worship of the sea. The focus of the whole megalithic complex is the royal mortuary at the islet of Nandawas, with its 20-foot-high walls surrounding the central tomb enclosure. Throughout its 500-year existence, the city was a political and ceremonial seat of power, serving as a religious center, a royal residence, a fortress, an urban marketplace, and the seat of local government. The population of Nan Madol during its heyday was probably over 1,000 people, the majority of whom were commoners serving the nobility. At the beginning of the 13th century AD, the island of Pohnpei is thought to have been conquered and unified by the mysterious Soderlur dynasty, and it was then that the spectacular complex was constructed as a ceremonial and political seat for a new royal line. The Soderlur line was brought to an end in the 1500s by exiled Pompeian warrior Issyk-Kul. The new chiefs, known as Namwaki, occupied Nan Madol for a couple of hundred years, but by the 1800s, when the first Europeans arrived, the site was deserted. Why remains one of the many mysteries of this incredible site. There are certainly mysteries surrounding Nan Madol. Some of the stones and columns at Nan Madol are so substantial that no one has been able to work out how the site was constructed. The Pompeians had nothing to fix the stones together like concrete, nor are they known to have had diving equipment, so it's a mystery how they sank the heavy stones into the lagoon. A clue to how the transportation of the great megaliths were moved may lie in crystal basalt columns discovered at the bottom of the lagoon near Temwen Island and on the shores of other islets in the area, which would suggest that the stones were transported by raft. According to local legend, the stones used in the construction of Nan Madol were magically flown to the site by the two brothers who supposedly founded the complex. Although archaeologists have located several possible quarry sites on the main island, the exact method of transportation of the construction material has still not been determined. But the site of Nan Madol has been linked with much greater enigmas than the method of its construction. One controversial theory connects the site with lost continents beneath the Pacific Ocean. Lemuria and Mu are interchangeable names given to the lost land believed to have been located somewhere in either the southern Pacific or Indian Oceans. This ancient continent was apparently the home of an advanced and highly spiritual culture, perhaps the mother race of all mankind, but it sank beneath the waves many thousands of years ago as a result of a geological cataclysm of some kind. The thousands of rocky islands scattered throughout the Pacific, including Easter Island, Tahiti, Hawaii, and Samoa, have been claimed by some to be the only surviving remains of this once great continent. Lemuria, the alternative name for the lost continent, also originated in the 19th century. Ernst Heinrich Haeckel, from 1834 to 1919, a German naturalist and supporter of Darwin, proposed that a land bridge spanning the Indian Ocean separating Madagascar from India could explain the widespread distribution of lemurs, small, primitive tree-dwelling mammals found in Africa, Madagascar, India, and the East Indian archipelago. More bizarrely, Haeckel also suggested that lemurs were the ancestors of the human race and that this land bridge was the probable cradle of the human race. Other well-known scientists, such as the evolutionist T.H. Huxley and the naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, had no doubt about the existence of a huge continent in the Pacific millions of years previously, which had been destroyed in a disastrous earthquake that submerged it between the waves, much as Atlantis was thought to have been drowned. Before the discovery of continental drift, it was not unusual in the mid-late 19th century for scientists to propose submerged landmasses and land bridges to explain the distribution of the world's flora and fauna. In 1864, the English zoologist Philip Lutley Sclater, from 1829 to 1913, gave the hypothetical continent the name Lemuria in an article, The Mammals of Madagascar, in the Quarterly Journal of Science, and since then it has stuck. The theory of a lost continent in this area has been put forward by many different people, most notably in the mid-19th century by scientists in order to explain the unusual distribution of various animals and plants around the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The idea of Lemuria as something more than a physical place, or at least somewhere which had been inhabited by non-human entities before the appearance of man, derives from the writings of a colorful Russian occultist, Helena Petrovska Blavatsky, from 1831 to 1891. Blavatsky was the co-founder, together with lawyer Henry Steele Olcott, of the Theosophical Society in New York in 1875. The society was an esoteric order designed to study the mystical teachings of both Christianity and Eastern religions. In the late 19th century, occultist Madame Blavatsky reincarnated the idea of Lemuria as a lost continent, spiritual homeland, and influenced a host of subsequent occultists and mystics, including well-known American psychic healer and prophet Edgar Cayce. The popularization of Lemuria, Mu, as a purely physical place began in the 20th century with ex-British Army officer Colonel James Churchward, and the idea still has many adherents today. The lost civilization of Lemuria, Mu, was brought dramatically back to public attention in 1931 with the publication of Colonel James Churchward's bizarre The Lost Continent of Mu, the first in a series of 5 books by Churchward about the lost continent. In the book, he claimed that the lost continent of Mu had once extended from an area north of Hawaii southwards as far as Fiji and Easter Island. According to Churchward, Mu was the original Garden of Eden and a technologically advanced civilization which boasted 64 million inhabitants. Around 12,000 years ago, Mu was wiped out by an earthquake and submerged beneath the Pacific. Apparently, Atlantis, a colony of Mu, was destroyed in the same way 1,000 years later. All the world's major ancient civilizations, from the Babylonians and the Persians to the Maya and the Egyptians, were the remains of the colonies of Mu. Churchward claimed he received this sensational information when, as a young officer in India during a famine in the 1880s, he became friendly with an Indian priest. The priest told Churchward that he and 2 cousins were the only survivors of a 70,000-year-old esoteric order which originated on Mu itself. This order was known as the Nakal Brotherhood. The priest showed Churchward a number of ancient tablets written by the Nakal order in a forgotten ancient language, supposed to be the original language of mankind, which he taught the officer to read. Churchward later asserted that certain stone artifacts recovered in Mexico contain parts of the sacred-inspired writings of Mu, perhaps taking ideas from Augustus Le Plongeon and his use of the Troana Codex to provide evidence for the existence of Mu. It was Churchward who first posited the theory that the Cyclopedian ruins of Nan Modal represent the remains of one of the 7 cities of ancient Mu, Lemuria. However, radiocarbon dates and analysis of pottery from Nan Modal revealed the construction of the site began around 1200 AD, though the area may have been occupied from as early as 200 BC. Such dates would certainly preclude any connection with Churchward's Lemurians or their descendants. Indeed, Churchward never produced any evidence to back up his exotic claims, and he never published translations of the enigmatic Nakal tablets. Though they still have many followers today, Churchward books are perhaps better read as entertainment rather than factual studies of Lemuria. Divers working on a submarine project in McDonald Lake in the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve, Ontario, Canada, discovered a submerged man-made ancient stone structure, possibly 5,000 to 10,000 years old. For some, this is irrefutable evidence of a long-lost civilization that inhabited the region before the last ice age. 1 or 2 researchers have linked the discovery to Canada's Stonehenge, a huge 5,000-year-old stone wheel discovered south of Alberta. Who were the people who constructed these mysterious monuments, and what do they represent? The Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve Limited is a privately owned forest comprising 120 square miles in Halliburton County, Ontario, Canada. The owner and manager of the 25,000-hectare Halliburton Forest is Dr. Peter Schlieffenbaum, who inherited it from his father. Recently, various sources on the net carried a story about a submarine survey of McDonald Lake, a popular tourist attraction which apparently took place in 2008. According to the story, during the survey, divers encountered an ancient stone structure which was thought to be proof of the presence of a mysterious ancient culture in the area, life from central Ontario ancestors. Staff at the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve would often see this unusual stone structure balanced on the top of a rock ledge at a depth of about 40 feet below the present lake level, whilst in the tour submarine, which was in existence for a few years at the site. The structure consists of a 1,000-pound elongated, south-pointing rock sitting on a baseball-sized stone at each side, which in turn rested on a massive slab. Initially, the structure was considered a complex version of a glacial erratic, rocks carried by glaciers thousands of years ago and left where they happened to melt at the end of one of the recent ice ages. However, when various geologists and archaeologists examined images on the subject, some expressed doubts about its natural origin. Their main objection was that the structure has straight edges rather than rounded, which would normally characterize rocks scoured by glaciers. One alternative was that the mysterious structure was man-made, but the problem was, how could that be established? The Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve Limited decided to hire an underwater archaeologist to examine the structure more closely. Apparently, after a brief examination of the structure, this unnamed archaeologist concluded that it was undoubtedly the result of human activity rather than an accident of nature. The company also employed a statistician to calculate the probability of these 7 rocks in the lake falling on top of each other to create what looked like a structure. The statistician determined that the probability of 7 rocks falling into such positions at the right time and place was almost impossible. But if the structure was man-made, what was it? Who built it and when? Some researchers think it resembled the prehistoric stone cairns found throughout the world, which serve as monuments, burial sites, markers for ceremonial land, or even navigational aids. Others think it may be a burial chamber or perhaps a dolmen. Dolmens are a type of single-chamber megalithic tomb, mostly dating from the early Neolithic 4000 to 3000 BC, found in a variety of places throughout the world, but mostly in northwest Europe, particularly in the region of Brittany, France, Britain and Ireland. The thick layer of silt covering some of the surfaces of the structures indicate that they are very old, but beyond that, without further evidence, it was impossible to say when it was built. However, when geologists were consulted on the matter, they apparently pointed to a drought which may have hit eastern North America between 9000 and 7000 BC. At this time, conditions were so dry that water levels in the Great Lakes were as much as 165 feet lower, and inland lakes like McDonald Lake may well have been at least 40 feet lower than their current levels. If the structure of the McDonald Lake is a prehistoric monument of some kind, why was it situated in such a remote place? One theory is that the sparse local population at the time may have been attracted to the spot by lake trout, often described as glacial relics, as they are a holdover from the Ice Age and live mainly in deep, cold water habitats. One geologist suggested that in prehistoric times, McDonald Lake was not a lake at all, but part of an ancient river system, which made an ideal habitat for the trout. But no prehistoric monuments of the cairn or dolmen type exist in the USA, Canada, or anywhere else in the world dated to anywhere near 9000 to 7000 BC. Does that make this structure the oldest in the world, or should the glacial erratic theory be examined further? However attractive these explanations for the Lake McDonald structure being a prehistoric monument are, without further evidence obtained in an independent study or excavation unconnected with the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve Limited, such as contemporary artifacts or signs of man-made tooling marks on the stones, we cannot say this for sure. There are 1 or 2 researchers who have linked the underwater structure at Lake McDonald to a mysterious monument known as Canada's Stonehenge. This would make the Lake MacDonald prehistoric structure later in date, say around 3000 BC, though still unique to the area. In his 2008 book, Canada's Stonehenge: Astounding Archaeological Discoveries in Canada, England and Wales, author Gordon R. Freeman puts forward the theory that the ancient structure is a prehistoric calendar. A summary of the book on Freeman's website states, "The discovery of a 5,000-year-old sun temple and an ancient time machine, Stone Age calendar, in Canada led scientist Gordon Freeman to groundbreaking discoveries in Stonehenge. During fieldwork and research from 1986 to 2006, Freeman found striking similarities between the surface geometry of the two sites. These similarities push back the boundaries of written history and have far-reaching implications for North American and European history. Could the same mysterious ancient cultures have built Canada's Stonehenge and the Lake MacDonald structure? Perhaps they were both related to ancient astronomical observations. Freeman describes what he discovered at the ancient site of Canada's Stonehenge, located in Vulcan County, Alberta, in his book. "I had found an amazingly accurate year-round calendar in this sun temple, marked with rock lines pointing to sunrises and sets at critical dates. I later learned of arguments going on, mainly negative, about whether Stonehenge contained marked observation lines to the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset. By applying what I had learned in Alberta to observing sunrises and sets through Stonehenge, I found that an accurate, entire year-round calendar exists in Stonehenge." The term Canada's Stonehenge refers to the monument known by archaeologists and historians as Majorville Medicine Wheel. There are between 70 and 150 Native American stone structures known as medicine wheels spread over the northern United States and southern Canada. Though each individual structure is unique, the shape of the most common type of medicine wheel resembles that of a wagon wheel lying on its side, with a central cairn from which lines of cobblestone radiate outwards to a surrounding ring of stones. The diameter of medicine wheels, as well as the number and length of their spokes, varies. The largest so far discovered has a diameter of around 80 feet. Occasionally, there will be a break in the outer stone circle to allow a stone pathway or entrance into the center of the structure, and sometimes one of the spokes can be considerably longer than the others, perhaps signifying the importance of the direction in which it's pointing. The dates of these medicine wheels also vary considerably, but it is acknowledged that the oldest so far investigated is the Majorville Medicine Wheel, which was started around 5,500 years ago. There is no doubt that the wheel may have served some astronomical function, but it is more probable that this would have been part of a wider ritual use, perhaps involving hunting magic or buffalo fertility. This is not to say that Native Americans were not sophisticated enough to build observatories, far from it, but in one sense, to state that the Majorville Medicine Wheel was built only to make complex astronomical calculations is to apply modern Western ideas from a 21st century technology-dominated era back into the past. This explanation reflects our own concerns with timekeeping, calendars, computers and space, not necessarily those of the Native Americans who built and used Canada's Stonehenge. Recent research in Brazil has revealed the discovery of an ancient megalithic observatory built at least 5 centuries before the European conquest of the Americas began. This finding, along with other archaeological fascinating discoveries in Brazil in recent years, which include giant land carvings, remains of fortified settlements, and complex road networks, are challenging the earlier views that the Amazon had been untouched by humans except for small nomadic tribes. Nearly all the discoveries were made after a period of widespread deforestation in the Amazon in the early 90s through to the mid-2000s. The archaeology of the Amazon. For decades, the Amazon was thought by archaeologists to have been almost uninhabited rainforest, but recently were made after a period of widespread deforestation in the Amazon in the early 90s through to the mid-2000s. For decades, the Amazon was thought by archaeologists to have been almost uninhabited rainforest, but recently researchers have been finding new evidence that the area was in fact a hive of human activity and home to millions of people. In March 2018, a study funded by National Geographic and the European Research Council Project PAST revealed details of 81 sites in the previously unexplored territory of the Amazon's upper Tapajos basin. Settlements discovered in the area ranged from small villages of around 100 feet wide to a large site covering 19 hectares. The sites were first discovered by satellite imagery of the area revealed by deforestation. The remains of the settlements are represented by ditches enclosing the sites for fortification, sunken roads, and earth platforms on which houses would once have stood. Dr. Jonas Gregoria de Souza from the University of Exeter was the first author of the study. He said regarding the findings and the distribution of the sites, "The idea that the Amazon was a pristine forest, untouched by humans, home to scattered nomadic populations, we already know that was not true. The big debate is how populations were distributed in pre-Columbian times in the Amazon. The idea was that in the areas that are located further away from the main rivers, populations maybe were actually smaller and they had a negligible impact on the environment. We demonstrated that these regions may have had pretty large populations as well as in the past." Wood charcoal associated with pottery fragments from one site was carbon dated to between 1410 and 1460 AD, which fits in well with the dating of many of the sites previously discovered in the southern rim of the Amazon, which showed a peak of activity between 1250 and 1500. Models based on the team's research indicate that at the time, the southern rim of the Amazon alone could have had a population of between 500,000 and 1 million people. However, this population was soon to be decimated by the arrival of Europeans. According to de Souza, diseases traveled much faster than people, and probably this population was already weakened by diseases brought by Europeans even before the Europeans set foot in the area. The Solstice Archaeological Park is located near the city of Calçone in Amapá State, northern Brazil. The site contains a megalithic stone circle and is often referred to as the Amazon Stonehenge or the Brazilian Stonehenge. The megalithic site, which is located on a hilltop on the bank of the Rio Grande River, consists of 127 upright blocks of granite, each of up to 13 feet in diameter and weighing several tons, standing evenly paced in a circle measuring over 98 feet in diameter. After conducting radiocarbon testing and carrying out measurements during the winter solstice at the site, some scholars in the field of archaeoastronomy determined that an indigenous culture arranged the megaliths into an astronomical observatory about 1,000 years ago, or 5 centuries before the European conquest of the Americas began, and 3,500 years after the building of Stonehenge. Archaeologists theorize that the site, referred to in academic sources as AP-CA18, was constructed by a sophisticated indigenous people for astronomical, ceremonial, or burial purposes, or even a combination of all three. One of the stones at the site has a circular hole carved into it. During the winter solstice, the sun shines directly through this hole onto another rock, supporting the idea that the Amazonian Stonehenge was used as an astronomical site. According to the New York Times, the site was discovered by a cattle rancher named Lealsan Camilo de Silva. Apparently, de Silva was removing trees in the late 1990s to make land for his cattle to graze on when he discovered the stones. In reality, de Silva already knew they were there, having initially found them in the 60s, but he said he had avoided the site because he felt that it was sacred. Recently, hundreds of huge earthworks known as geoglyphs have been discovered in western Brazil, revealing the last remnants of land used by ancient societies before the dense foliage of the Amazon rainforest concealed them centuries ago. The peak period of forest burning to clear land happened between 2300 and 1400 years ago, during which the first earthworks are believed to have been constructed. While the form and extent of these sites can be determined using aerial observations, researchers are still not sure what the original purpose of the sites was. Many of the structures are unlikely to have been villages, as excavation at the sites has not revealed the substantial amounts of cultural artifacts which would be expected if they had been habitation sites. The layout of the sites also suggests that they weren't built for defensive purposes. One explanation which has been put forward is that the areas were used for ritual gatherings of some kind, and so would have been visited only intermittently by those who once lived in the area. Archaeologist Jennifer Watling has compared the layout of the sites with England's Stonehenge, saying, "It's interesting to note that the format of the geoglyphs, with an outer ditch and inner wall enclosure, are what are classically described as henge sites. The earliest phases at Stonehenge consisted of a similarly laid out enclosure." In November 2020, it was announced in the press that one of the world's largest collections of prehistoric rock art had been discovered in the Amazonian rainforest. The discovery, described as the Sistine Chapel of the Ancients, consisted of tens of thousands of paintings of animals and humans created up to 12,500 years ago on cliff faces stretching across nearly 8 miles in Colombia. The date of the artwork was based partially on images of now extinct Ice Age animals, such as the mastodon, a prehistoric relative of the elephant that had been extinct in South America for at least 12,000 years. There are also depictions of Paleolama, an extinct camelid, as well as giant sloths and Iron Age horses, all seen at first hand and painted by some of the very first humans ever to reach the Amazon. Other images include fish, turtles, lizards and birds, as well as people dancing and holding hands, with one figure wearing a mask resembling a bird with a beak. The incredible discovery was filmed for a major Channel 4 series called Jungle Mystery: Lost Kingdoms of the Amazon. The documentary's presenter, archaeologist and explorer Ella Al-Shamahi, said of the extraordinary findings, "This site is so new they haven't even given it a name yet." The discovery was made by a British Columbian team funded by the European Research Council. The researchers' team leader, a professor of archaeology at Exeter University and a leading expert on the Amazon and pre-Columbian history, said, "When you're there, your emotions flow. We're talking about several tens of thousands of paintings. It's going to take generations to record them. Every turn you do, it's a new wall of paintings. We started seeing animals that are now extinct. The pictures are so natural and so well made that we have few doubts that you're looking at a horse, for example. The Ice Age horse has a wild, heavy face. It's so detailed, we can even see the horsehair. It's fascinating." The site of the discovery is so remote that after a 2-hour drive, a team of archaeologists and filmmakers had to trek on foot for around 4 hours to find it. Even after arriving at the site, the team found that some of the paintings were placed so high up that they could only be viewed with drones. Al-Shamahi remarked on the incredible depiction of Ice Age life in the Amazon as suggested by the newly discovered paintings. One of the most fascinating things was seeing Ice Age megafauna, because that's a marker of time. I don't think people realize that the Amazon has shifted in the way it looks. It hasn't always been a rainforest. When you look at a horse or mastodon in these paintings, of course, they weren't going to live in a forest. They're too big. Not only are they giving clues about when they were painted by some of the earliest people, that in itself is just mind-boggling. But they're also giving clues about what this very spot might have looked like. More savanna-like.